People ask me why I still can't walk past a man in uniform without my chest going tight. And I tell them the same thing every time. Because I watched one of them choose not to run. That's the part nobody believes when I say it out loud. Everybody ran that day. I ran. Grown men ran. Mothers ran with bobbies pressed so hard against them you'd think the children might break. The whole world, for about 90 seconds, was nothing but feet hitting pavement and people screaming names that weren't mine. And in the middle of all that, there was one man who didn't move. Let me start at the beginning, though, because if I just tell you the end, you won't understand why it stays with me. You won't feel it the way I felt it. And honestly, I want you to feel it. I want somebody else to carry a piece of this so it stops being only mine. So, my name's Mark. I'm from Leeds. Nothing special about me. I drive a delivery van. I support a football team that breaks my heart every season. And back then I had a little girl named Sophie who was turning 7. 7, she'd been counting down to it for a month. She had this calendar on the fridge, one of those cheap ones with a kitten for every month, and she'd cross off the days with a red marker. Big fat X's. By the end she could barely fit the X in the box, she was pressing so hard. Her mum and I had split up the year before. I won't go into all that, it's not the story. But the short version is, I didn't get as many days with Sophie as I wanted, and the days I did get, I wanted to make them count. So when she said, and she said it like it was the most reasonable request in the world, "Daddy, for my birthday I want to see the guards with the big hats," I didn't even think about the cost or the train or the time off. I just said yes. The guards with the big hats, that's what she called them. She'd seen them in a picture book. There was this illustration of one standing outside the palace dead straight, that black bearskin hat sitting on his head like a tower, and underneath it said something about how they're not allowed to move or laugh no matter what. And Sophie, being Sophie, decided that was the most fascinating thing she'd ever heard. "What if you tickle him?" she asked me once. "You can't tickle him, love." "What if a bee lands on his nose?" "He stays still." "What if it's a really big bee?" I remember laughing, even then. She went quiet for a second, thinking about it the way kids think, with their whole face. Then she said, "He must be the bravest man in England." I didn't correct her, why would I? So that's how it started. A train down from Leeds on a Saturday morning in late spring. I'd booked us into a premiere in the night before so we wouldn't have to rush. Sophie wore her new shoes that lit up when she stamped pink with little stars in the soles, and she stamped the whole way down the platform just to watch them flash. People smiled at her. You couldn't not. She had this gap where her front tooth used to be, and she'd worked out that if she pushed her tongue through it she could whistle, sort of, and she did it constantly. This thin little whistle drove me mad. I'd give anything to hear it now. London was warm that day. Properly warm for England. One of those rare days where the skies just blue all the way across with no clouds bothering it, and everybody comes out of their houses blinking like they forgot the sun existed. The pavements were packed. Tourists everywhere, all of them holding their phones up, all of them in shorts that said they'd checked the weather but hadn't quite believed it. We came up out of the tube and the heat hit us, and Sophie grabbed my hand and said, "Is it this way? Is it this way to the guards?" Hold on, let me look." I had it all planned out on my phone. We'd walk down through the edge of Hyde Park, which I figured she'd like. There's a playground, there's the water, there's that big arch, and then come round towards the palace. Take our time. Get an ice cream. See the guards. Then maybe the playground again after if she had any energy left, which, knowing Sophie, she would. She had the kind of energy that should be illegal. So we walked into the park. And God, it was beautiful. I want you to picture it properly, because you need the beauty to make sense of what came after. The trees were full and green, that fresh new green you only get in late spring before the summer dust gets on them. There were people lying on the grass everywhere, couples, students, a group of lads playing some game with a tennis ball that had no rules I could work out. A man was selling balloons near the path, the helium kind, and they bobbed above him like a bunch of fat-colored grapes. Sophie wanted one. After, I said, on the way out, they'll burst if we drag it round all day. She accepted that. She was good like that, my Sophie. She'd push, but she knew when to stop. There was an ice cream van parked up by one of the gates, and we got a 99 each, you know, the soft serve with the chocolate flake stuck in. Sophie's flake fell out before she'd even had a lick, and she looked at it on the ground with this devastation that only a 6-year-old can produce, like the universe had personally betrayed her. So I gave her mine, stuck it in her cone, and the way she lit up, you'd think I'd handed her the crown jewels. "You're the best dad," she said, with chocolate already on her chin. "I'm telling you about the ice cream because I keep coming back to it. That stupid little moment. Me kneeling down to wipe her chin with the back of my hand, the sun on the back of my neck, the smell of cut grass and somebody's barbecue somewhere off in the distance, and a busker playing a guitar badly near the bandstand, and everything in the entire world being completely, perfectly fine. That was, I worked it out later, that was maybe 20 minutes before. You don't know is the thing. You're just living. You're wiping ice cream off a chin. You have absolutely no idea that a clock somewhere has already started." We carried on through the park. Sophie was babbling about the guards the whole way, asking again whether they ever needed the toilet, whether they slept in the hats, whether the hats were heavy, whether she'd be allowed to touch one. I answered every question as seriously as I could. I didn't actually know most of the answers, so I made some up, the way you do. I told her the hats were made from bear fur, which I genuinely thought might be a lie, but turns out it's true, and she gasped so loud a woman walking past turned to look. "A whole bear," Sophie said. "I don't think a whole bear. Half a bear. Maybe half a bear." She thought about that for a good while. We came out the other side of the park onto the busier streets. This is where it starts to get crowded for real. You've got the traffic, the big red buses, the black cabs, tourists clumped on every corner trying to work out which way the map's pointing. There were a couple of those open-top tour buses crawling along with people on top taking photos of everything, even the bins, even the traffic lights. A hen party went past in matching pink sashes, already half-cut at noon, shrieking with laughter. A bloke was selling little Union Jack flags and London snow globes off a fold-out table, and Sophie wanted a flag, so I bought her one, £2, and she waved it around like she was leading a parade of one. There was a street performer doing the living statue thing, you know the ones, painted all silver, standing dead still on a box until you put money in the hat and then they move a tiny bit and the kids scream. Sophie stopped dead to watch him. "He's like a guard," she whispered to me. "He doesn't move either." And I said something like, "The real guards are even better, you wait." We put 50p in his hat. He did his little robot bow for Sophie, and she absolutely lost her mind with delight. I keep all these little things, you understand. I've turned them over so many times in my head that they've gone smooth like pebbles. The flag, the silver man, the whistle through her tooth. We got closer to the palace area. You could feel the crowd thickening, everybody flowing the same direction like water finding the drain, all of us heading towards the gates and the railings and the guards. There's a sort of energy to it. People get excited. Even adults. You see these grown businessmen and they're craning their necks like kids. And then we saw him. Not at the palace itself. This was at one of the spots a bit before it, where there's a guard posted at a kind of sentry box near the railings. You know the setup. There's the box, painted, and the guard stands out front of it on a marked-out section, and there's a low barrier or a bit of rope or just an understood line that the public aren't meant to cross. Tourists gather round and take photos, and the guard just stands there, existing, magnificent and completely still in the heat in that thick red tunic that must have been like wearing an oven, the bearskin hat throwing a hard little shadow over his eyes, his rifle held just so. Sophie stopped walking, just stopped. I nearly tripped over her. She stared up at him with her mouth slightly open, and her Union Jack flag drooping in her hand, forgotten. "That's him," she breathed. "That's the guard." "That's him," I said. I don't know how to explain what she did next except to say it was so completely Sophie. She let go of my hand. She walked right up to the front of the little crowd, as close to that line as she was allowed, and she stood there. And then, and I swear this is true, she copied him. She stood up dead straight, chin up, arms by her sides, flag held against her leg like it was a rifle trying to be a statue. A few people noticed and started smiling. A woman next to me actually said, "Oh, bless her," in an American accent and got her phone out. Sophie held it for maybe 10 seconds, which for her was an eternity, and then she wobbled and giggled and looked back at me to make sure I'd seen. "Did you see, Daddy? Did you see I was being a guard?" "I saw, love, you were brilliant." And here's the thing I noticed. The guard, I didn't know his name yet, I'd learn it later, but I'll tell you now so you can picture him properly. His name was Daniel. Daniel Hewitt, 23 years old. From somewhere up near Carlisle, I found out after, a village so small you'd miss it if you blinked on the motorway. Daniel Hewitt did not move. Of course he didn't. That's the whole point of them. But I was close enough and watching closely enough that I caught it. The corner of his mouth. Just the very corner, the tiniest flicker. Not a smile, he'd never have allowed himself a smile, they're trained out of it. You can be in serious trouble for breaking, but a flicker, a twitch, the kind of thing that happens when somebody's trying so hard not to laugh that the effort shows up despite them. He'd seen my daughter copy him, and somewhere behind that frozen face and under that ridiculous beautiful hat, a 23-year-old lad from Cumbria thought it was funny. I caught his eye, just for a second, and I gave him this little look, this dad look, sort of an apology and a thank you both at once. And his eyes flicked to me, just the eyes, the head never moved, and then back to the middle distance. But he'd seen me. We'd had a moment, him and me. Two strangers agreeing without words that the small person between us was something special. I think about that a lot, that before any of it happened, there was this little thread already connecting us. Me and this lad I'd never met and would never have met in 100 normal years. My daughter built that thread by being daft enough to pretend to be a statue in the middle of London. We stayed there a while. Sophie didn't want to leave. She kept asking him questions out loud, knowing he wouldn't answer, just enjoying that he wouldn't. "What's your name?" "Nothing." "Do you like being a guard?" "Nothing." "My name's Sophie, I'm 7. Well, I'm 7 on Tuesday." "Nothing," but I'd swear the corner of his mouth went again. "Daddy says you're not allowed to move even if a bee lands on your nose." A couple of the tourists laughed at that. One of them, a big jolly bloke with a German accent, said to Sophie, "He is a very brave man, ja." And Sophie nodded solemnly and said, "He's the bravest man in England," repeating it word for word like she'd said it before, which of course she had to me weeks ago. And I looked at Daniel Hewitt standing there sweating in his oven of a uniform, putting up with a 7-year-old's interrogation without so much as blinking, and I thought, yeah, maybe she's right. Maybe there's a kind of bravery in just standing still while the whole world mills about in front of you, doing your job, being a fixed point. I didn't know yet how right she was. I didn't know yet that I was about to watch this exact man prove it in a way that no picture book could ever capture. The thing about the next part is that there were warnings, sort of, but none of us read them as warnings. That's how it always is, isn't it? Afterwards you can see the signs laid out like breadcrumbs. In the moment, they're just bits of an ordinary day. There'd been a van. I noticed it earlier without noticing it, if that makes sense. Parked up a side road off the main stretch near where the crowds thinned out a bit between the busy part and the park. A white van, nothing remarkable, the kind you see 10,000 of in any city. It had been there when we walked past. I clocked it the way you clock any parked van, which is to say I didn't, not properly, it was just part of the furniture. Maybe a delivery, maybe a builder. I drive a van myself for a living. A parked van is the most invisible thing in the world to me. There was also a feeling later that some people described. A few folk near the front said afterwards there'd been a man, that he'd left the van and walked off quick, head down, didn't look back. But you have to be careful with afterwards. Afterwards, everybody remembers a suspicious man. The mind goes back and paints one in because it needs there to have been a sign. It needs the world to have made sense, even terrible sense. I don't know if there was really a man. I never saw him. I was too busy watching my daughter pretend to be a soldier. What I do remember, and this one I trust, because I felt it in my body before my brain caught up, is the birds. There were pigeons everywhere, like there always are. Fat London pigeons strutting about under everybody's feet, hopping for dropped chips. And at one point, maybe a couple of minutes before, all of them went up at once. The whole lot. A great clattering rush of wings, dozens of them, lifting off the pavement and the railings and the rooftops all in the same half-second and wheeling away over the trees. I felt it more than saw it, that sudden upward rush. I looked up. Sophie looked up too. "Birds," she said, pointing. "Yeah," I said, "funny." And then I forgot about it because what's a flock of pigeons? They go up for no reason all the time. A dog, a loud noise, nothing at all. You don't build a theory out of pigeons. But I've read since that animals know. That they pick up on things we can't, vibrations, frequencies, something in the air. And I'll tell you, I don't know if that's science or rubbish, but I know what I saw. I saw every bird in that part of London decide at the exact same moment that it wanted to be somewhere else. I wish we'd listened to the birds. Sophie tugged my sleeve. "Can we see the big palace now, the really big one with the gold?" I checked the time. We'd been with the guard a good while. The crowd had shifted around us a few times over, new tourists arriving as old ones drifted off towards the palace gates. I figured we'd done the sentry box, we'd had our moment, time to move on to the main event. "Go on then," I said. "Say bye to the guard." Sophie turned back to Daniel Hewitt, drew herself up dead straight one more time, gave him a little salute that she'd seen somewhere, probably the telly, and said, very seriously, "Bye. Thank you for being brave. And I'm not making this up. I will swear it on anything you put in front of me." His eyes came down, just for a flicker, down to her, and the corner of his mouth went one last time. He didn't move his head, didn't make a sound, didn't break in any way that anyone could have reported him for. But he looked at my daughter, and his face did the thing a face does when it's saying thank you back. She beamed. I took her hand. We turned to walk towards the palace. And we'd gone, I've measured it on a map since I've stood there and counted my steps, we'd gone maybe 40 paces. 40. We were just at the edge of where the crowd thickened up again, where you could start to see the front of the palace properly, the gold on the gates catching the sun. Sophie was whistling through her tooth. And the world ended. I don't know how else to put it. I've tried 100 ways, and that's the only one that's true to how it was. There wasn't a bang, not the way you'd imagine a bang. It was bigger than a sound. It came up through the ground first, through the soles of my feet, before it ever reached my ears, this enormous shove, like the whole street had been picked up and dropped. And then the noise arrived, and the noise wasn't a noise. It was a wall, it was a thing that hit you. It went straight through your chest and rearranged something inside you. And then there was no sound at all. That's the part people don't tell you. After a thing like that, for a few seconds, there's just nothing. A high, thin ringing, and underneath it, silence, like the world had been switched off. I saw people's mouths open. I knew they were screaming. I could see they were screaming, but I couldn't hear them. I couldn't hear anything except that ringing and my own heartbeat, which had become the loudest thing in the universe. I was on the ground. I don't remember getting there. 1 second I was upright, walking, holding my daughter's hand, and the next I was on the pavement with grit in my mouth and my ears full of cotton wool and no idea which way was up. And my hand was empty. That's the thing I came back to before anything else, before I even understood what had happened. My hand was empty. I'd been holding Sophie's hand, and now I wasn't, and I didn't know where she was, and the world was full of smoke and silence and people I couldn't hear. I want to stop here for a second, because I've told this story before and I always rush through this next part to get to the better part, the part about Daniel Hewitt, the part that's the reason I'm telling you any of it. But that's not fair, not to the moment and not to you. So let me just sit in it for a breath, the way I had to. A bomb had gone off near Hyde Park. In a white van I'd walked past without a second look, on the most beautiful spring afternoon I'd ever seen, 20 feet, maybe less, from where the crowd had been thickest, 40 paces behind me and my little girl. And in the smoke and the silence and the ringing, on a day that had been nothing but ice cream and balloons and a child saluting a soldier, I couldn't find Sophie's hand. That's where I have to leave it for now. I know. Believe me, I hated living it more than you'll hate waiting to hear what happened. But you need to understand what the world looked like in that moment, so that when I tell you what one man did, one young man in a red coat and a bear fur hat, a man whose entire job was simply to stand still, you'll understand why I'll be telling this story until the day I die. My hand was empty, and I started to scream her name. I couldn't hear myself doing it. That's the strangest thing. I could feel my throat tearing with it. I could feel my mouth making the shape, Sophie, Sophie, Sophie. But the sound went out into that silence and disappeared, like shouting underwater. I got onto my knees. The world wouldn't hold still. It kept tilting, sliding sideways, and I'd grabbed the pavement to stop it, and the pavement was warm and wet, and I didn't let myself think about why. There was smoke. Not like a bonfire, thicker, dirtier, with a chemical bite to it that got into the back of your throat and stayed. It rolled over everything in a gray-brown fog, and through it I could see shapes moving, and shapes not moving, and I made myself not look at the ones that weren't moving because I was looking for one specific small shape, and I couldn't afford to look at anything else. The ringing in my ears started to crack. Sound came back in pieces. First the high whine, then, underneath it, far away, like it was coming up from the bottom of a well, the screaming. And then all at once, like someone had turned the volume from nothing to everything, the whole thing crashed in on me. Hundreds of people, crying, wailing. A car alarm somewhere going off and off and off. Glass still falling, that high, light, tinkling sound of glass coming down from somewhere above, long after, like rain that had decided to fall upwards first. Sophie. I could hear myself now, and hearing myself made it worse, because I could hear how it sounded, not like a man calling his daughter, like an animal. I crawled. I couldn't stand, not yet. My legs wouldn't take it, so I crawled forward over the ground where we'd been walking, towards where the blast had come from, which was insane. Every instinct in a body is built to go the other way, and I went towards it, because that was the direction she might be. There were people running over me, past me, around me. A man's knee caught me in the side of the head and knocked me flat, and he didn't stop, didn't even know he'd done it, just kept going. I don't blame him. Nobody was a person in those first seconds. Everybody was just a body trying to get away from the thing. Sophie, Sophie, where are you, baby? Shout for daddy, shout. And then I heard it. Thin, high, through everything, through the screaming and the alarm and the ringing, that whistle. That stupid, beautiful, maddening little whistle through the gap in her teeth. I have never in my life heard anything so good. I went towards it. I clawed across the ground towards that sound, and the smoke shifted, a bit of wind, or just the way smoke moves, and there she was. She was sitting up, on the pavement, maybe 15 feet from me. She'd been knocked off her feet, same as me, but she was sitting up, and she was whistling, this thin, terrified whistle, over and over, because I worked this out after, because I'd told her once, ages ago, when we got separated in a supermarket, I'd told her, if you can't find me, make a noise, make any noise, and I'll come. And she'd remembered. In the middle of all that, my 6-year-old had remembered. She couldn't make her voice work, so she did the only sound she had. I got to her. I don't remember the distance, I just remember suddenly having her, both arms round her, pulling her into me so hard I worried after that I'd hurt her. She was shaking. Her little face was gray with dust and there was blood on her, a cut above her eyebrow, just a small one. Head wounds bleed like anything, but it was small. I checked. I checked her all over right there with my hands going everywhere, her arms, her legs, her tummy, her back, and she was whole. She was whole. She was crying now, properly, great heaving sobs. And the crying was the most wonderful sound because crying meant breathing, meant alive. "I've got you," I kept saying. "I've got you, Daddy's got you, I've got you." Her shoes were still flashing. That's a detail that destroys me. The little pink stars in the soles were still going, flash, 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 kicking out their happy light into all that smoke and ruin, because she was kicking her legs the way a frightened kid does, and the lights didn't know. The lights just did their job. I picked her up. My legs found themselves somehow. You'd be amazed what a body can do when there's a reason. I got her up onto my hip, her face buried in my neck, her arms a noose around me, and I turned to run away, finally, the right way, away from the smoke and towards the park, towards open space, towards not here. And that's when I saw him. The guard. Daniel Hewitt. Standing at his post. Now I want to slow this down, because this is the bit that matters. This is the bit I've spent years trying to make people understand, and it's hard, because the easy version makes it sound smaller than it was. He was about 40 feet away. His sentry box, the box itself, was damaged, the side of it blown in. There was a great black scorch up one wall of the building behind him, and the railings near him were bent and twisted like something had grabbed them in a fist. The blast had reached him. It had absolutely reached him. He was close enough that it had thrown debris all around where he stood. I could see bits of stuff scattered across his patch of ground, chunks of masonry, a shoe that wasn't his, paper, dust, all the wreckage that a bomb makes out of an ordinary street. And he was standing. Not crouched, not sheltering, not running, standing, in the position, dead straight, chin up, rifle held just exactly the way it had been held 2 minutes before when my daughter was saluting him. The bearskin hat still on his head, though it had dust all over it now, gray dust dulling that deep black fur. His red tunic was filthy. There was, I could see even from there was blood on the side of his face, coming down from somewhere up near his ear, a dark line of it running down his jaw and into his collar, and he had not wiped it away. He was just standing there. And everyone was running past him. The whole tide of the crowd was pouring past this one still figure, screaming, scattering, and he stood in the middle of it like a rock in a river, completely motionless, eyes forward, holding his post. I stopped. God help me, in the middle of all that, I stopped with my daughter on my hip, and I stared at him because I genuinely could not understand what I was seeing. My first thought, and I'm ashamed of it now, but I'll be honest, my first thought was that he must be dead, that he'd been killed on his feet somehow and just hadn't fallen, because how else? How else does a man stand in that? But then I saw his chest move. He was breathing. Hard, you could see it, his chest going up and down quick, the way yours does when your body's flooded with everything and screaming at you to run. He was breathing like a man who wanted, with every cell he had, to run. And he wasn't running. I've thought about why 1,000 times, and I think I've finally got it or close to it, so let me try to tell you. They train them, the guards, to hold their post. That's the whole thing, that's the discipline, that's what all the standing still nonsense that tourists giggle at is actually for. It looks like a joke. A man who won't move for a bee. But it isn't a joke at all. It's this, that when the moment comes, when everything in you is screaming to break and run, you have a deeper thing trained into you, a thing under the fear, and that thing says you hold. You hold because that's your job. You hold because that's the order. You hold because there are reasons bigger than your own skin. And you decided a long time ago, on a parade ground somewhere in the rain, when none of it mattered, that you would be a man who holds. And here's what I understood standing there. He wasn't holding his post because he didn't understand the danger. The blood on his face said he understood it better than any of us. He was holding it because he understood it. Because in the middle of a panic, when everybody runs, panic feeds panic. A running crowd is its own kind of disaster. People go down, people get trampled, children get separated, it cascades. And a still point in the middle of all that, one figure not moving, one figure holding, it does something. I don't know the science, but I felt it. Even me, even in my state with my own kid in my arms, the sight of him standing there steadied something in me. It said, this is survivable. Look, a man is standing. The world has not entirely ended. Get your daughter and walk. I wasn't the only one it worked on either. I saw it. As people came level with him, this rock in the river, I watched the running turn into something less wild. People slowed. Some of them stopped screaming. A woman near him with 2 kids, she'd been shrieking, completely gone, the kind of fear that's about to make a person do something that gets them hurt. She got near Daniel Hewitt and she stopped. She actually stopped. She looked at him standing there and you could see it land on her, the same thing that landed on me. He's not running, so maybe I don't have to run like the world's ending. Maybe I can just walk. Maybe I can hold my kids' hands and walk. And she did. She gathered her 2 and she walked, quick but not mad, towards the park. He was the still point. He held, and because he held, other people could. I don't think he knew he was doing all that. I don't think there was any grand thought in his head. I think it was simpler and somehow even better than that. I think he stood there because standing there was the last order he'd been given and nobody had given him a new one. And so, with blood running down his face and the worst day of his life going off around him, he did the thing he'd promised to do. He held his post. There was an officer. I didn't see this part as clearly. It came together from what others said after and a bit of what I caught. There was a more senior soldier who came for him. Eventually. Through the smoke, moving fast and low. And people said there was a moment where this officer was shouting at Hewitt and Hewitt didn't move, and the officer had to physically give him the order, had to release him from the post before he'd stand down. Because that's how it works. You don't abandon a post. You're relieved of it. Someone with the authority has to come and lift the weight off you, and until they do, you carry it. That's a kind of loyalty I don't have words big enough for. The whole world on fire, and this lad's holding on for the one thing he was told to hold. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because the part that broke me, the part that's the actual reason this is my story, and not just a story I read, happened before the officer came. Happened in the seconds while I was still standing there frozen, staring at him, with Sophie on my hip. Because Sophie lifted her head off my neck. She'd been buried in me, sobbing, not looking at anything. But she heard the crowd, or she felt me stop or something, and she lifted her head, this gray little dust-covered face with the blood drying over her eyebrow and the tears cutting clean tracks down through the dust on her cheeks, and she looked round. And she saw him. She saw the guard, her guard, the bravest man in England. Standing. And I felt it go through her whole body, this little jolt, this recognition. And she went very still in my arms. And she looked at him standing there in all that horror, holding his post, blood on his face, not moving, and a sound came out of her that I will hear for the rest of my life. She said very quietly, almost to herself, "He's still being brave. That's all, he's still being brave." And then she did something. She wriggled. She wanted down, no, not down, she wanted to be up higher. She pushed up off my chest to sit up tall on my hip, and she got herself as straight as she could, dust and blood and all, and she put her little hand up to her forehead. She saluted him, again, same as before, the way she'd done it 2 minutes and a lifetime ago when the world was made of ice cream. She saluted him across 40 feet of smoke and wreckage, this tiny broken girl, and she held it. And I will swear this with my last breath. I will swear it in any court, in front of God, to anyone who will listen for the rest of my life. His eyes came down. Just his eyes, the head never moved. The discipline never broke, not properly, not in any way you could have reported. But across all that distance, through all that smoke, his eyes found my daughter saluting him, and he held her gaze for 1 second, 2. And the corner of his mouth went. That same tiny flicker I'd seen before when she pretended to be a statue. That same proof of the human being living inside the still red statue. There it was again, on the worst day either of us would ever live, blood running down past it. The corner of his mouth went, for her, just for her, a private thing between a wounded soldier and a 6-year-old girl. I see you, little one, I see you being brave too. And then his eyes went back to the front. And he held his post. I turned and I carried my daughter into the park, and I did not look back, because I couldn't. Because if I'd looked back, I'd have stopped being able to walk. And I had to walk. I had to get her out. That was my post, and I held it. But I carried that picture out with me, her hand at her forehead, his eyes coming down, the corner of his mouth. And I have never put it down, not once. Not in all the years since. I don't remember much of the next hour. That's normal, they told me later. The brain does that on purpose. It takes the worst stuff and it sort of smears it so you can't get a clean look at it ever again. A mercy, I suppose, though it didn't feel like one. I remember the grass. I got Sophie into the park, onto the open green where there was no smoke and no glass and no shapes on the ground, and I sat down with her in my lap because my legs finally just quit. And I held her. I rocked her. I said the same 3 or 4 things over and over. You're safe. I've got you. It's over. You're safe. And I don't know if I was saying it to her or to me. There were others on that grass, dozens of us. Strangers all sat down where their legs had given out, all holding whoever they'd managed to keep hold of. Nobody talked much. There was a kind of terrible quiet over the whole park, broken up by crying and after a bit by the sirens. The sirens came from everywhere at once. You've never heard so many. They came and they came, and they didn't stop coming for what felt like hours. This rising wail from every direction, and you knew that each one meant help, and you knew that the number of them meant how bad it was. A woman came and knelt by us. She had a high-vis thing on. I don't know if she was official or just someone who'd taken charge. There were people like that, ordinary people who just stepped up, and she looked at Sophie's head and said the cut was nothing. Head cuts always look worse. She'd be fine. And did either of us hit our heads hard, any blackouts, any sick feeling? I said I didn't know. She checked Sophie's eyes with a little torch from somewhere and said she was all right. She was all right. Keep her warm, keep her talking. And she moved on to the next ones. Keep her talking, so I did. I asked Sophie daft questions. What's your favorite color? What do you want for tea? What was the silver man's name, do you think? And she answered in this small, wobbly voice, but she answered, and every answer was a small miracle. At one point she said, "Daddy, is the guard okay?" And I didn't know. I genuinely didn't. I'd carried that picture of him out, the eyes, the corner of the mouth, but I'd left him there, standing in it, and I had no idea if he'd got out. If the officer had reached him, if there was a second device, if all the ifs. So I lied. The good kind of lie, the kind you tell a kid. He's okay, love. He's the bravest man in England, remember. He's okay. He looked at me, she said. When I did the salute, he looked at me. I know, love, I saw. I think he liked it. I think he did too. And she put her head back on my chest, and after a while she went quiet, not asleep but somewhere near it, the way kids drop into themselves when they've used everything up. We were taken to a hospital eventually. Sophie got a couple of butterfly stitches on her eyebrow and a lot of fuss made of her by the nurses, who gave her a teddy and a sticker that said "Brave Patient," which she took very seriously. I got checked over, a burst eardrum, as it turned out, which is why the silence afterwards, and a load of small cuts on my hands and arms I hadn't even felt, and a bruise on my back the size of a dinner plate that came out blue and yellow over the next week. Nothing that mattered. We were the lucky ones. We were so far on the lucky side of it that I've never been able to talk about how lucky without my voice going, because being lucky means there were people who weren't. 6 people died that day. 6. I'm not going to dress that up or hide it behind the nice parts of the story because they were real and they mattered, and some of them were standing roughly where Sophie and I had been standing 2 minutes before by the sentry box having their photos taken, the 40 paces. I've never stopped thinking about the 40 paces. Why us and not them? There's no answer to that. I stopped looking for one a long time ago. You just carry it. Now Daniel Hewitt. I didn't know his name yet. On that day he was just the guard, the man who stood. But I needed to know what happened to him. It became a kind of obsession in the weeks after, when we were home in Leeds and the news was full of it, and Sophie was having the nightmares, and I was lying awake every night seeing smoke. I needed to know if the still point in the river had made it out of the river. It was in the papers in the end. Not the front pages. The front pages were full of the bigger, harder things, the dead and the hunt for who did it. But a few days in there was a piece. A photograph taken by someone in the crowd on their phone that had gone round. You'll maybe have seen it, even it got famous for a while. It's blurry and the smoke's all through it, but you can make him out clear enough. The guard standing in the wreckage while the world runs past him. Dust on the black hat. The line of blood down his jaw. And the piece named him. Private Daniel Hewitt, 23, Coldstream Guards, from a village up near Carlisle. It said he'd been treated for shrapnel wounds and a perforated eardrum, same as me. Funny that, the two of us deaf on the same side for a while and concussion, and that he'd been kept in overnight and discharged. It said that he had held his position, that an officer had ordered him to stand down, and that even then, this was the line that got me. This was the line that's in the photo caption. Even then he had asked permission before leaving his post. He asked permission. With shrapnel in him and the street on fire, he asked permission to go. There was a quote from him too. They'd asked him about it, why he stood, why he didn't run, and apparently he'd been dead uncomfortable with all the attention, didn't want any of it, kept saying other people did far more, the medics, the bystanders, the ones who ran towards it to help. But they got one line out of him. And the line was, it wasn't bravery, it was my job. If I'd run, what would that have told everyone else? You hold, that's all, you just hold. You hold, that's all. I cut that piece out of the paper. I've still got it. It's gone soft at the folds now from being got out and looked at. I'll tell you the rest, because it doesn't end with a newspaper clipping. It would be a smaller story if it did. About a year later, a bit more, 14 months maybe, there was a thing. A memorial, a service for the anniversary, for the families and the injured and the people who'd been there. They held it near the park. And we were invited, me and Sophie, because we'd been registered as casualties at the hospital, so we were on a list, and the list got the letters. I nearly didn't take her. She was 8 by then. The nightmares had mostly stopped, but not all the way, and I didn't want to crack the thing back open. But she found the letter on the side, because of course she did, and she read it. She could read properly by then, and she looked up at me with this absolute certainty and said, "We have to go. We have to." So we went. It was a quiet thing, dignified. There were names read out, the 6, and a silence, and some words from people far more important than me. Sophie held my hand the whole way through, hard, her little hand in mine, and this time I made very sure I didn't let go. And afterwards, when people were milling about, when the official part was done, and everyone was just standing in clumps not knowing how to leave, Sophie tugged my hand. "Daddy, what love? Is he here?" I knew exactly who she meant. I hadn't even let myself hope it. "I don't know, sweetheart, maybe. There's a lot of." "There," she said. And she pointed. Across the way, near the edge of the gathering, a bit apart from everyone, stood a young man in his dress uniform. Not the big bearskin hat. This was the formal stuff, but you could tell what he was. And his face. I'd only ever seen it frozen or in a blurry phone photo, but I knew it. The way you know a face you've carried for over a year. Daniel Hewitt. I won't pretend I knew what to do. I'm not a man who's good at this. I stood there like a lemon for a second, but Sophie had no such problem. Sophie let go of my hand, and this time it didn't frighten me. This time I let her, and she walked straight across that grass, 8 years old in her good dress, walked right up to a soldier she'd met once for 10 minutes when she was 6, and stopped in front of him. He looked down at her, a bit puzzled, polite, not knowing her. And she stood up dead straight, chin up, arms by her sides, and she put her hand to her forehead and she saluted him. And I watched it happen on his face. I watched it land. I watched him go back through 14 months in about 2 seconds, the little girl who'd pretended to be a statue, who'd called him the bravest man in England, who'd saluted him through the smoke. I watched him remember. His mouth opened. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her. And there was no order to hold him still now, no post, no parade ground, nothing to stop him. A Private Daniel Hewitt, Coldstream Guards, got down on one knee on the grass so he was level with my daughter. And he saluted her back. Properly, slowly, the way you'd salute someone who'd earned it. "Hello again," he said. "I remember you." And Sophie, who'd been so brave, so unbelievably brave for the whole day, suddenly wasn't a brave little soldier anymore. She was just a little girl. And she burst into tears and threw her arms around his neck. And he caught her, careful, gentle, this lad who'd held his post in a bombing, and he held her while she cried into his shoulder, and over the top of her head he looked at me, and I saw that his eyes had gone too. I went over. I shook his hand. I couldn't get many words out. I tried to thank him and it came out a mess, and he wouldn't have it anyway. He kept shaking his head. No, I didn't do anything. I just stood there. You got her out. You're the one. That's the kind of man he was. Couldn't take it. Genuinely could not take being called brave by the very people he'd been brave for. "But I got one thing out," I said. "She told me that day, when she saw you standing there with everyone running, she said he's still being brave. That's what got me moving. A 6-year-old looked at you and found enough to keep going. So don't tell me you just stood there. Standing there was the whole thing. Standing there was everything." He didn't answer. He looked down at Sophie, still in his arms, and the corner of his mouth went. We kept in touch a bit over the years. Christmas cards mostly. He came up to Leeds once when Sophie was about 11 and we took him to the football and our useless team actually won, which I took as a sign the universe owed us one. He's out of the army now, married, a little boy of his own, last I heard. Ordinary life, which is all any of us ever really wanted, the most precious ordinary life. He still won't talk about that day, still says he didn't do anything. But here's the thing I know that he won't say. Sophie's 20 now, 20 years old. At university, studying to be a nurse, she wants to be an A and E, the emergency stuff, the running towards it stuff. And I think we all know where that comes from. She's got her whole long life in front of her, the whole thing, every birthday she'll ever count down to with fat red X's, every daft and wonderful ordinary day. And she gets all of those days because a man chose not to run. Because on the worst afternoon of both our lives, when the whole world picked up its feet and fled, one young man in a dirty red coat with blood on his face decided that he was a person who holds. And a still point in the middle of a panic is worth more than anyone can measure, because it tells everybody else that the world hasn't ended, that you can stop screaming, that you can take your child's hand and walk. He'll go to his grave saying it wasn't bravery, it was just his job. You hold, that's all. But I was there. I saw it. I had it in my arms, the proof of it, a little girl with stitches over her eyebrow and stars flashing in her shoes, and I'll tell anyone who'll listen until the day I die. The bravest thing I have ever seen a man do was nothing at all. He just stood still.